I think probably my favorite family story is the way we we left Belgium when Hitler invaded on May 10th of 1940. Because what happened that day is, first of all, that's the day that Hitler invaded Holland and Belgium. He had invaded Poland in the east on September 1st of 1939, but he invaded the west of Europe, Belgium and Holland, on May 10th of 1940. And my father had gone downstairs because he had heard something was going on. He came back and he told my mother, he says, leave breakfast on the table, grab the kids, get whatever you can, and let's go. Excuse me. And we did just that. We went downstairs and we started to walk, I guess, towards the railroad station. I guess my father had in mind to get to Paris. And what happened on the way is that a British Jeep stopped and beckoned for us to get in. But my father was afraid because, I mean, there was a Jeep with soldiers with guns, and so he hesitated. But then the British soldier got down off the Jeep, and he told us, get in, get in. And so we did. And they took us to the railroad station. So they helped us. Now we boarded a train that was headed to Paris. And I don't know how long we were on the train, but as we got closer to Paris, there was an announcement that the train is not going any further because Paris was already being bombed by the Germans. So from there, I'm not exactly sure how it worked, but we had to get onto another train going in a different direction, and we wound up heading to the British, to the English Channel. And we wound up, after a pretty harrowing journey, we wound up in Boulogne, France, which is on the English Channel. And we disembarked there, but there they were evacuating British subjects. And my father didn't know any English, but he took out his wallet and he flashed it and he said, journalist. Well, journalist is a universal word. So they said, oh, come in, come in, come in. And so we were able to get onto the dock area, but there they separated the men from the women and children. So my parents got separated, and subsequently a boat came that was headed back to England, and my mother got on the boat with my two sisters and me, and we left my father on the dock there, but we managed to get to England. That was also a harrowing journey because the German planes were strafing us. What they wanted to do, we were on the deck of the boat, and what they wanted to do was to kill people that were running away. I don't know, but we managed to get to England safely. We got to Folkestone, I think it was, in England, and there the British government what's the word that I'm looking for? The refugee agencies, they helped locate us to a British family that had agreed to put us up. And that was with a family in Peckham, which is just outside London. In the meantime, my father was left on the dock in Belgium, in Boulogne, and there was another boat that came, but they couldn't come all the way up to the dock, so they threw ropes onto the dock area for the people on the dock to catch a hold of the rope and swing himself onto the boat. That's what my father did. But he also told about this fellow next to him who missed the rope and fell onto the dock area below and got killed. So my father was very, very lucky to get onto the boat. That boat also went to England, and my father started making inquiries as to what happened to my family, to my mother and my sisters and me. And he found us, and we were reunited. This was probably a couple of weeks after we arrived in England. And we had been put up with a Gentile family, and my father was very, very upset about that. So he complained. He says, no, we're Orthodox Jews, and we must be placed with a Jewish family. And subsequently they did, with a cantor in London. And that's the gist of the escape story that we managed to do. One important thing that I always like to tell is that it was not an easy trip with the train going to Boulogne in France. Planes were strafing us and bombing us, and we had to run into the fields. And at one point, my mother turned to my father, and he says, "Where is Ziegler?" I was Ziegler, and they said, "Well, I thought you had him. I thought you had him." And they turned around and they saw me on the train, and I'm, "Come and get me! Come and get me!" So anyway, they rescued me, and the rest is history. So we were all very, very lucky. And
how old were you during the story?
I was 4.5. I was born in December of 1935. My older sister was about 9 years old, and I had a younger sister who was about 2.5. So there were 5 of us: my parents, my 2 sisters, and me.
So do you remember it since you were so young?
You know what? I've heard the story so many times from my family and told the story so many times that I don't know what I remember or what I was told. I think most of it was what I was told, because at 4.5, you don't remember that much. So
what do you remember? Maybe, do you remember what you had for breakfast?
No, I have no idea. But I know we left it on the table, and maybe the landlady who owned the building that we were in, she got the benefit of that.
Do you remember how you felt? If you felt scared, or is that also?
No, I never thought about that. I'm sure it was a pretty terrifying experience at the time. But thinking back how I felt at that time, I have no idea. Like I said, that story about being left on the train, I'm sure that was a scary moment for me. But for the rest of it, kids, especially age 4 or 5, they don't remember that much, and so it wasn't so scary for us. I'm sure it was terrifying for my parents.
Can you tell me a bit about what your father was like?
Well, in retrospect, it turned out that what my father did at the time was he rescued us. He saved us. I had heard a story of a family that was in Holland at the same time on May 10th of 1940, who had decided, you know what, the Germans are going to be here for a short time. Let's wait them out and we'll be all right. They wound up in concentration camps and were killed. So the fact that my father came back right away and said, let's leave breakfast on the table and go, really was a very life-saving experience for us because we were able to get out. Now, one of the things that I've been thinking about ever since is that we didn't have any money in the bank. We didn't have cars. We didn't have homes. It was easy for us to leave. I'm sure there were a lot of people there that said, no, we have to go to the bank first. We have to do this first. We have to do that first. And that probably didn't help them because the sooner you got out, the sooner the better. My father was a waiter. He was a waiter in a diamond exchange in Antwerp, which was a big exchange, but most of them in the diamond exchange were Orthodox Jews, and he worked as a waiter in the restaurant that catered to those diamond merchants.
And what about your mother? What was she like?
My mother was a lovely, lovely woman, as you would expect me to say. But she also, I'm not sure if she worked in the diamond exchange or she worked for a private family. She mostly was a housekeeper. And that's how I remember her. As a matter of fact, when we got to England, my father was able to get a job as a waiter in a kosher restaurant, and the owner of the restaurant had a house in London, which he agreed to rent to us. Now, we were only five people, but the house was very big and had lots of rooms, so we in turn rented out those rooms to boarders, single people who didn't have their own home or whatever and all that stuff. So over the years, we must have rented out to a dozen, maybe up to 20 people over time, not all at the same time. And my mother kept house for them. She cleaned the rooms. She made fires in the fireplaces in all the rooms and worked very, very hard. My father, in the meantime, had to go every day to work in the restaurant. At night, he had to go up on the roof to check to see where there were report in where there were fires, so that everybody had their job to do during the war. And my father had his job, and my mother was able to get the ration books that were issued to all the people living in London, and go shopping and bring the food home and cook, etc., etc. Both of them had very harrowing experiences. It was very tough for them. But for us kids, maybe my older sister remembered more, and she was more affected by what was going on. My younger sister and I, we were more, the American planes are flying overhead, so we were more excited by the experience rather than terrified.
That's really interesting. Were there any interesting people who came to rent those rooms?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, after the war, there was a couple who, this was going back probably to 1946 or 47, but they went to Israel. There was the first people that I heard went to Israel. And some other people, all of them were interesting people. I was not a reader. My sister could sit in front of the fireplace and read 5 books a day. I, on the other hand, was not given to reading, and I regret it to this day. But one of the boarders was a Frenchman who was very educated, and my mother went to him and said, "Listen, can't you get Sigi to read?" And he said he would try to help. And he introduced me to Jules Verne. If you don't know the name, he's the one, the story about from the Earth to the Moon, 20,000 leagues under the sea. He wrote books. Jules Verne wrote books like that. And this fellow, his name was Maurice Estekin. See, I remember the name. Don't ask me the names of the other people, but he introduced me to Jules Verne, and I read a few of his books. and I enjoyed them, great adventure books. And then it left me. I, I still did not become a reader, but I remember that, that was the time that I really enjoyed reading those books.
Did you go to school during the time?
Yeah, interestingly enough, even though we were Jews, we went to school that was assigned to us. So I went to St. Mary's parochial school, which I probably, my sister and I, well, my sister later, but were the only Jews in the school, and we never had any bad experiences in that school. I guess they were sisters who ran the school. They looked after us. They were very, very nice to us. And I went from the time that I was 5 till I was 11. That was elementary school. Then at that point, you go into secondary school, which is like high school, junior high. And there I went to an all-boys school. My older sister went to an all-girls school. And it wasn't such a bad experience. I didn't have much of a relationship with the girls from the girls' school, but my sister, my older sister, she went to dances, and there was much more of a relationship between the two schools. But it was all boys, and I have a picture that was taken of the entire school, and I have it on my wall, which one day I hope to show you. And I had a good experience there. But life did not go so easy for me. By the time that I was bar mitzvahed, I had already contracted tuberculosis, TB. So I stopped school, and ultimately I was sent to a sanatorium, which was out in the countryside, fresh air, which was part of the regimen to get better. And I spent 6 months in the sanatorium. But overall, I lost probably a year of schooling in that time. And I remember my father came to visit me one day, and he said, "We're leaving today. We're not leaving today. You're leaving the sanatorium today, and ultimately we have now gotten our visas to come to America." And so that was very exciting. And my father warned me. He says, "Don't tell anybody that you were in this hospital, because they won't let us leave England." So for years after I came to America, I refused to tell anybody because I was afraid they were going to send me back. But there's one funny experience that I do remember from that whole time is that I was examined by a doctor, and he was talking to me. He says, "What would you like to do?" I says, "Oh, I want to become a sailor." Why I decided I wanted to become a sailor, I have no idea. But he said, "Well, are you good at geography?" I said, "Well, I suppose I am." He says, "Well, what is the capital of the United States?" I said, "Oh, that's easy, New York." He says, "Well, I think maybe you should study up on your geography a little bit better before you become a sailor." So that's what I remember about that experience.
Do you remember the first day when you arrived to America?
Actually, it was interesting because, London was known for very thick fogs. And I would bump into a lamppost whenever I was out in the fog. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. As a matter of fact, the bus drivers, one driver would walk in front of the bus, and the other one would, of course, steer the bus. But that's how slow we could go during a thick fog. So that was London. Now I come to America, and we're stuck outside New York Harbor for 24 hours. Why? Because of a thick fog. So that wasn't too exciting. But what was exciting is that when fog cleared and we came into New York Harbor. We saw all these skyscrapers and everything. That was really absolutely amazing. I suppose I also saw the Statue of Liberty, but again, when you were older, that meant more to those people, my parents, my older sister, than it did to me. But of course, it's something that you do remember. And as the years went on, it became more exciting knowing that the boat went right past the Statue of Liberty. But that was it was a rough crossing. It was in March of 1950, and everybody got sick, and so it wasn't the most pleasant experience. But again, we came to America. That was the excitement. So we were met there by my aunt and uncle, and they took us to their apartment, and we stayed there for a few days. And I'm not sure what happened after that, but we found our own place, and we lived in London from 1950 to 1950. Well, now I'm getting lost. We arrived, war ended, 46, arrived in 1950, and that's right, March 28th, 1950, we arrived. And as a matter of fact, we just passed, no, today is May 20th. May 20th that we're recording this is May 20th. May 20th is the anniversary of my becoming a citizen of the United States. So those are all exciting, things that don't mean anything to you particularly, but very exciting to me and my family.
What was it like to become a citizen at the time?
Well, it was very exciting because we all had to study, including my mother had to study books, how many senators there are from each state, and those kind of questions. And we went downtown New York to answer these questions. And then when we all passed, somebody raised their hand and swore us in that we would be good citizens throughout. And thankfully, we were good citizens, and we remained in the United States to this day. Unfortunately, I'm the only one of my 5 family members that have survived to this day. They've all passed away over the years. And but I look on this time, March 28th, the day I arrived, May 10th, the day we left Belgium, May 20th, the day I became a citizen. These are all very, very, very important dates in my life.
Do you remember anything what do you remember about Belgium?
It's funny because I don't remember that much. I was 4 years old. But years later, I guess it was about 30 odd years later, my friend and I were traveling by Eurail Pass throughout Europe. And we had started in Holland, and we were taking a train, and my friend was the one who made all the arrangements. And he took us through Brussels. And I said to him, wait a minute. And we had to stay in Brussels for half a day or whatever. And I said, listen, if we have to stay in Belgium for a couple of hours, let's go through Antwerp. I would like to go back and see the place where I lived. And I had this kind of image, of the building that I lived in. And as it turned out, he hurt his knee just as we left Holland. So he stayed on the train or in the train station while I went, to find the place that I lived in. And my father had told me before I left, he says, when you get out of the train station, he says, you look for this and this bus, that will take you to the street that we lived in. The name of the street was 𝗺𝗀𝗄straße. So I don't know what it means, but anyway, that was the name of the street. And till then, I was looking forward to going back to see the place that I lived. But when I got off the train in Antwerp and headed to the bus station, I got so excited thinking about where I'm at, the place where I was born, you know, and so I had goosebumps on top of my goosebumps. It was very exciting at that time. But anyway, I managed to find 𝗺𝗀𝘀𝗶𝗃, and I was walking down the street and I saw a group of kids with a teacher. And I said, oh, maybe this is a school that my sister went to. So I started to ask questions. I'm sure they didn't understand me because I was speaking English. But I said, I'm from America. They got all excited, you know, from the United States. Anyway, that was just a slight experience, you know, on the way. And I found the building that I lived in. And what happened then is that, again, I was very excited. I couldn't even talk English properly, and I didn't know any other languages at that point. So I knocked on the door, and this woman comes to answer. And she sees the scruffy-looking guy, and I didn't know how to express myself as to, yes, I had lived here in this building, and we left Belgium. Back in 1940, and I couldn't express myself that way. So she got a little nervous, understandably so. And she had never opened the door wide, and I wanted to see inside to see if I could recognize anything. So the more she was closing the door, the more I was opening the door. I said, nothing is happening here. So I said, okay, thank you very much. And I went across the street and I took pictures of the house. And that was my experience going back to where I lived. So I really didn't have a chance to see, you know, where what our living conditions were at that time. Again, I was much too excited to be able to tell anybody what was going on. Now I was heading back to the railroad station after seeing, you know, this house that I had lived in, and I passed the diamond exchange. And I said, wait a minute, my father worked in the diamond exchange. Let me go in and see if anybody remembers his name. So I went in and I saw the receptionist, and I explained who I was, et cetera, and I said, is the manager of the restaurant here? Figuring he would remember my father if he was the same man that, you know, lived there before the war. And it turns out he was not there. So I said, all right, I guess this is a lost cause. And I left there. But before I left, I looked on the directory and I saw the name of a person that I recognized. And I went inside and I said, is Mr. 𝗵𝘃𝗶 here? So she said, no, Mr. 𝗵𝘃𝗶 is sick. He's home. I said, is there any way I can get a message to him? And I left him a letter that who I was, where my parents lived, et cetera, et cetera. And later on, he and his wife contacted my parents, and they came to see my parents in New York. And so that was the exciting thing about my trip back to the railroad station. From there, we headed to Paris. Then from there, we went to Lausanne, Switzerland, and a few other places around Europe. And it was a very exciting trip.
What was the image that you had of the building?
Well, it was interesting. I don't know if there was a garage at the bottom of the building, but there was a garage door that you went through to get into the building. That image I had when I was 4 years old, so I recognized it. But that was all that I did recognize. And like I say, I was never able to peer in and see what was like this. So that was the image I had, and I had remembered it, and I still have it. It was a green, like, garage door, and don't know if it still exists, but it existed at that time. That was around 1988, I think, many years after I left. So, and then on a separate trip, I went to England, and I went back to the house that I lived in England. And I knocked on the door, and I explained who I was. And this woman, a very nice woman, she says, "Oh, I remember when you left." I said, "How long have you been living here?" She said, "Since 1950. I said, "Well, that was the time that I left. My family left here." She says, "That's right, I remember." She says, "We lived next door, and my father wanted to expand because we had a number of children." They were very Orthodox family from, I think, from Hungary. She said, "My father bought the house from the landlord that had owned it, and they had expanded into the house." Then she said to me, "Would you like to meet my father?" I says, "Your father is still around?" She says, "Yes." So he came down. He was a very small guy, and he was dressed in his the Hasidic type of garments that we are used to seeing here. And I said to him, "Do you remember my family?" So he says, "Of course." He says, "I remember," and I'm leaning close in because I'm telling you a secret now. He says, "I remember your father on Shabbos afternoon. He would go in the backyard and light up a cigarette." I said, "That was my father, all right." So, but that's all that we kind of talked about. We didn't, we didn't have much of a conversation beyond that. I guess I was afraid he was going to tell any more secrets about my family. So anyway, that was a very enjoyable experience. And I had told this woman that that opened the door, I said, "You know what? I remember when you got married." She says, "You do?" I says, "Yes, because my mother told us that you had just met your husband a week or two before you got married." She says, "Of course. And my children too." They were very, very Orthodox, ultra-religious family. And the Hasidim, that's the way they met their spouses, their future spouses, and they didn't waste any time. They got married. So that's what I remember about this woman that answered the door. She had lived next door, got married not very suddenly. Obviously, it seemed suddenly for us, but that was what I remembered about her. So it was and then she said, "And of course, my children too." So they were carrying on the tradition that they knew from Hungary. I think they were Satmar Hasidim. Now, there's one other experience I want to tell you that was very, very important about my life in London. Not my life in London, but my mother had befriended a woman. She was a neighbor, and she was a Gentile woman, and they had befriended each other, and they got very, very friendly. One day, I don't know what was said on the radio, but my mother went to visit her, this woman, and she said, "Hitler should have gassed all the Jews." And when my mother heard that, she walked out and never saw this woman again. And I can't, even in thinking about that, I can't believe that this woman who was so nice to my mother, would even have thought that. But you never know about what bigotry or what religious hatred goes on within somebody, and it ultimately comes out.
When did your mother tell you that story?
That was at the time that it happened. I know why I remember it, because it was so poignant to me. because I was older at that time. I was probably 8 or 9 or 10 at that time. So it registered with me. And I've never, ever forgotten that story.
Did the woman didn't know that your mother was Jewish?
Oh, yes. No, she obviously knew. But, you know, one-on-one, a lot of people are very friendly. But deep down, they hold religious hatred with it, and it happens. It happens now. You know, people can be very friendly with each other, but then when certain situations happen, this thing comes out, and their true selves are exposed. Not unusual.
Did your father?
I'm sorry?
What were you gonna say?
I said, fortunately, I don't remember much religious bigotry in my own personal life. I was a young person. We were going to school. Everybody had schooling on their minds rather than religious bigotry. They probably were more amazed at who I was, this kid from Belgium, you know. And when I got up in front of the class to talk, I talked with a very strange accent. And so I'm sure the fact that I was Jewish didn't mean much to them. It probably was that I was not British, you know. So I didn't experience much religious bigotry as I was growing up in London. But I'm sure my father experienced those kind of situations, and I remember my mother was torn apart when that happened to her.
Who was your best friend in England?
Interestingly enough, I don't remember too much about my friends in England. My school years were interrupted when I went to the sanatorium to recover from TB. We had a young teenager that was living next door to us in London, and we had befriended her. And I think there was another friend that I had at that time, but I don't remember much about my friendships in London. Right after school in London, I would run around to go to I went to a yeshiva. I forgot all about that. I went to a cheder, which is like an elementary school in Hebrew and religious study. And then I went to a yeshiva, and then I was running around to another part of London to study for my bar mitzvah. So I was busy, and I don't remember what friends I had there. It was not hard for me to leave London, you know, and maybe get separated from long friendships. My sister, on the other hand, my older sister, she had ties. She was working in London, and she did not want to leave London to come to America. But she came to America, made her life there, got married, had 2 sons, and lived a good life, and passed away, I guess about 8 or 9 years ago at age 80. So my younger sister, she passed away much younger. She had cancer and passed away at age 59. My mother had cancer at the same time, and she only wanted to look after my sister. My sister was living in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and I said, "Ma," I says, "how are you going to look after Taya? You know, so you're not well yourself." And thankfully, my mother died shortly before my sister died, And I was grateful to know that my mother didn't know how sick my sister was, and that she ultimately died. So, and my father, oh yeah, my parents lived to age 93 and 94. So with all their terrible experiences about running away from Hitler and living through the war, working so hard, maybe that was the formula for long life. Because as I said, they lived into their 90s. My father died in my father died in 94, I think, 1994. My mother died a couple of years later, and I had gone to look after my father when he was sick with diabetes a couple of years before he died, and so I went to live with them. And then when my father died, I stayed on, to look after my mother. And after my mother died, I came back to my own apartment in Teaneck, New Jersey, from which I am talking to you now. I've been here 30 years.
What did your parents tell you about their experiences?
They didn't tell us very much. And even after the war, they didn't talk very much. And I regretted that, because years later, I said, oh, I wish I had asked my mother this or my father this. And and it was one day I was sitting with my father, maybe the year that he died, I'm not sure, I don't remember anymore. And we were talking about his experiences as a young person. And it turns out he was a refugee in World War I. He was living in Poland and with his family. And when World War I broke out, they were afraid of the Cossacks and the Russians. So they left their home in Poland and went towards Vienna. Ultimately, my father's sister settled in Vienna, got married there, and my father went back to Poland, and subsequently, still as a young man, maybe as a teenager, he left Poland and came to live. He lived in Germany, where he worked for an uncle of his. He lived in Paris, and ultimately settled in Antwerp, in Belgium, where he met my mother, and the rest of the history there. But I didn't really know too much about their early history, and that I have a very big regret. But I have heard that it is not uncommon for people who lived through the war. I'm talking about World War II, to talk about their experiences. So I missed that.
So did your father ever tell you any sort of hint or story or anything about what happened while you were separated?
No, not really. Not really. Again, the separation in France before we all headed to England was not for a long period of time. His experience was primarily waiting for the next boat to arrive. And then we were separated. We were bombed out in London. I think it was 1944. Hitler was constantly bombing London, first with planes, then with a V-1 rocket, and subsequently with a V-2 rocket. And we never knew, when the rockets would land. But a bomb fell across the street from us and knocked out all of our windows and ceilings. So we had to evacuate. That was in 1944. And my mother, my sisters, and I went to live in North Wales, which was a pretty safe area. That was part of Great Britain. If you know your geography about England, you have England, Wales, and Scotland. And we were living in London, but we went to live in North Wales. I think it was for a period of a couple of months. And while they were repairing, the British government was repairing our house in England. My father was staying in the house, but again, there was not much to tell about that. Then we all rejoined him, and we stayed there till the end, not only till the end of the war, till we got our visas to come to America. But that was the time I guess I was 1944. I was probably about 8 or 9 years old. And I met this little girl in North Wales who turns out to be the daughter of this family 𝗵𝘃𝗲 that I told you about, that I had looked up in the diamond exchange. So I never met her again, but I have a picture of her where I'm walking in the street in North Wales, in Bangor, where I'm holding her hand. So she was probably, I was 8 or 9, maybe she was 5 or 6, something like that. So that's how I met her, but I've had no contact with her since, to my regret. She was very cute.
Why did your family choose to come to America?
Well, it was interesting. We were living in England and we were safe, but my parents had no relatives in England. My mother had 2 brothers and had come to America. My father had a sister. So we said, that's the place where we should go. We have our relatives there. So that was 1946 that my father initially made requests for visas to come to America. But my father was a Polish citizen, and it took 4 years for the visas to come through, because there was a very limited number of visas that were available. I guess because there were so many Poles that were looking to come to America, Polish Jews particularly coming to America after the war. So it turned out there was a very limited number that they would allow in any year. And it took us 4 years to get our visas. But it was primarily because each of my parents had siblings that lived here in New York.
And what do you remember about your bar mitzvah?
Actually, my bar mitzvah is not exactly what you would experience here in New York, where it was like a wedding or whatever and all that stuff. We didn't have many friends. I had a bar mitzvah in the synagogue where, I had told you that we were living with a cantor. It was in his synagogue, the Finsbury Park Synagogue, and my father was talking to the rabbi beforehand, and he says, "What is your son's Hebrew name?" So he told him it was Zusha. Well, that was my name, because that was my mother's father's name, So the rabbi didn't like that. That was too Yiddish. So he says, no. He says his pasha is Zechariah. We'll call him Zechariah. So that's what I remember. I was given the name Zechariah at the time of my bar mitzvah. And of course, the rabbi is speaking, and because my pasha was Zechariah, he mentioned Zechariah. So I thought he wanted me to get up. So I got up and I acknowledged everybody. He said, sit down, sit down. Then in the afternoon, my mother had invited the butcher, the greengrocer, a couple of other people that she knew, because wherever she went shopping, she invited them, and then I would sing my Haftorah again to them, and that was the big deal about my bar mitzvah. So it was a very small, limited, but it was my bar mitzvah, so it was very exciting.
Who taught you the Haftorah?
Well, I went to a yeshiva in London, and I would go there after school every day. and I would learn it. And my father was very, very nervous at the time. At the time that I wasn't learning it properly, I wasn't the best student in the world. And but when it came time uh, for my bar mitzvah, I did okay. I did okay. So I was relieved that that was over. So and I think they were very relieved. We went to a shul where my father was standing next to me on the bima. My mother and my sisters were in the balcony upstairs. That's where the women sat, and they were quelling. They were very excited and very proud, and I was very relieved.
And do you remember what the family and the non-Jewish family who took you in at first, what they were like?
Oh, you mean when we first arrived in England? I really didn't remember them very well at all. Again, we were there not long because my father had come at the end of May, I think it was, and we asked to be transferred to a Jewish family very shortly after that. So I didn't have long experience with that family. But I mean, I don't remember anything bad about it. My mother, on the other hand, that place was not clean enough for her. So all she did was clean, get on her knees and scrub and all that stuff. Same story when all the people in London were sent down to the underground, the subway, because I had told you before that the Germans were sending bombs, were bombing London. Then we were faced with the rockets. So everybody was sent down to the underground, the subway, to sleep there. And needless to say, that wasn't clean enough for my mother. So we were there one day, and my mother said, "No, we're going home. This is not for us." So I don't remember too much about it, but we wound up sleeping in our kitchen. We had a very big kitchen. We had a long iron table. It was called a Morrison shelter, and that table was built had an iron ceiling to it, under which we got up and we got in and we slept. And that was, if the house was bombed directly, we would not have been saved. However, if a bomb like the bomb that hit across the street from us, it broke all the windows and the ceilings, so that iron table would protect us from getting really badly hurt. So that's where we slept in London. I don't know if we slept there all the time, or we slept in our own beds or whatever. I don't really remember those, but I do remember that table, which acted as a kitchen table, during the day. But at night, all of our boarders, my sisters, my father, we would all creep under that table and fell asleep feeling very safe. So that I remember. One other thing that I do remember in London is we had a cat named Mimi. And Mimi was very prolific. She had 44 kittens over the years. And we had to leave her in England when we left. So I don't know what happened to her, but I don't know how often these cats have kittens, but every so often we would find, I guess my parents my mother made arrangements for the cat, when she was ready to have kittens. And every once in a while we would look in a cardboard box and we would find all these kittens, which I guess we gave away. I don't really remember. But we left that. That was one of the things we left behind that we were very sorry about. That was Mimi. That was her name, Mimi. And she would talk to my mother. My mother would talk to her, and they understood each other. They were with each other for a long, long time, and cats have a way of relating to their owners, and that was the relationship my mother had with that cat. So that's what I remember.
Where did your family get her from?
I don't know. I'm not exactly sure, but there were mice in the house, and so we probably needed to get a cat just to catch the mice, and she did. She was very prolific at catching mice too, and maybe God knows what else. But she lived with us, I guess, through the whole time that, maybe 6, 7, 8 years that she was with us. So we loved her.
What did you take with you to America?
Trying to remember. I told you I had this picture of when I went to this all-boys school. I have that picture. It's probably about 4 feet long. How I managed to get that to America, I don't know, but we did, and that's what I brought with me. Not sure what else I might have brought with me. I was dressed in a cap, my school cap, which was in the school colors of dark blue and yellow, and unfortunately it blew off on the boat coming to America. The wind swept it off my head, and that was the last I saw of it. So again, I don't really remember too much more about what we brought. We couldn't bring too much, but we had a couple of silver spoons and forks that my mother had brought with her from Antwerp, and that traveled with us wherever we went, and we brought those back to America. And I think I still have them somewhere in my kitchen drawer. So I still have that, but I have very little else that came with us from my early years. And I don't know, it's interesting now that I'm thinking about it. I don't know what I would grab if I had to leave this apartment in a hurry. Of course, I'm in my 80s now. I've accumulated a lot. So it would be very hard for me to leave food on the table and let's get out of here. What I would grab, I have no idea. But fortunately, I didn't have that problem back when I was 4.
Yeah, I don't know what I would grab either.
Yeah, you think, you look around I look around the room, I said, that's important, and that's important, and that's important. But when you're limited as to what you can carry, it becomes very unimportant. So I don't know.
Okay, is there anything that you want to add?
Well, I'm trying to remember. I told you a lot more than I thought I would remember, but I told you about coming back, going to visit my house in London, which looked a lot smaller to me than when I remembered when I was a little guy. The house was so big, but when I came there, when I was a big guy, the place was very small. But it was a row house in London where there weren't any big houses. And that area of London, Stoke Newington and Stamford Hill, has now become an area like Williamsburg, New York, Brooklyn, New York, where it's predominantly Hasidic and black. But when I was growing up there, I don't really remember too much about who the neighbors were. So, but we all got along, so that was good. I don't really remember. Let me see if I have some notes here. Yeah, I made some notes here that when we got to England originally, the British government didn't want refugees to come and take jobs away from the British citizens. So what they did is allowing us to subsist on the bare minimum. Is my father made baskets out of straw. What those baskets were used for, I have no idea. But my older sister, helped my father make the baskets out of straw, and then they would get like a dime each for each basket or whatever and all that stuff. So I remember that he was home there. And I told you that later on, my father would have to go up on the roof and report fires that he would spot in the neighborhood so that the fire department could come and put them out quickly. I remember being a big soccer fan. And we lived within the shouting hearing of the English soccer team, Arsenal. And whenever there was a goal, the whole place would erupt, goal! And we could hear that. We didn't know. We assumed it was Arsenal that was scoring the goals. And I remember my cricket team was Middlesex. So that was cricket, of course, is the other big sport that England has. And I was a big cricket fan. And one day when I was older, I went to where Middlesex played cricket. And I remember one experience where I needed to go to the bathroom, and we went down into down some steps that led to the bathrooms. And I walk in and I see this woman in the bathroom. You know, she was an attendant. And I looked, I said, "What are you doing here?" She says, "Well, I'm afraid you're in the ladies' room. You should get out of here." So I remember that. But again, I was very young. It didn't mean very much to me at that time. So, but I do remember that experience about one time that I went to go see a cricket match on my own. But we didn't travel much through London at all. First of all, my mother was not too thrilled with us running around. So especially during the war years, but even after the war years, my mother was particularly concerned about our physical health. I remember at Passover, we would also, we would ask for a present for the 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝗿. And year in and year out, we would ask for a bicycle because we never had bicycles in those days. And the reason is because my mother was afraid that we would fall off and get hurt. And to this day, I never owned a bicycle. And I remember remember we went to a beach in the States with my friends, and they said, "Let's go riding bicycles on the beach." I said, "What do you mean? I can't ride a bicycle." And "What do you mean you can't ride a bicycle? Everybody can ride a bicycle." I said, "Well, I never rode a bicycle." Anyway, we rented bicycles and I managed okay. But that was it. That was my bicycle experience. So we were still waiting.
What were Shabbats like?
What was what?
Shabbat?
But interestingly, my parents were not really Shomer Shabbos Jews and didn't go to shul that often. But I had gone to yeshiva, and I was surrounded by people, who would go to shul. And I would get up and make breakfast on Shabbos morning and bring breakfast to my parents in bed. And then I would go to synagogue and spend Shabbat mornings in synagogue. So not that I guess I was religious. One thing I do remember is that on the Shabbos afternoon, my parents would go for a walk and my mother would carry a handbag. And my friends were very religious. When I would see them walking down the street, I would cross the street away from my parents, which I regret to this day. But I didn't want to. I'm not with them. So that was my Shabbos experience. But when we came to, and I was pretty religious in those days. But when we came to America, I said to my father, I said, I don't want to go to shul every Shabbos. I want to play, with my friends in the street. So he says, okay. And so that was it until my father died. And then I had to say Kaddish. And of course, I had to say it with an environment of a minyan. So we lived across, this is now in New York City. We lived in Washington Heights, and we lived across the street from a synagogue. And I would go every morning to say Kaddish. And all of a sudden, I became so involved in that. It was like a family. And so from now, my father died in 1994 to this day. And of course, this day, I'm saying today, this day, I still go to shul every morning. These days, I do it on Zoom, where your father goes to, where I know your father from. So, well, I knew him certainly before the Zoom days, but it's in my being. So from 1994, that's 26 years now that I go pretty much every day, sometimes twice a day, to go to shul, whereas I didn't grow up religious, and I don't consider myself really very religious. Don't tell the rabbi that. He knows. And but I do really enjoy that experience, being surrounded by fellow Jews and praying. And I always call that as being a family within a larger family. The family of the minyan being a part of the family of all the members of the synagogue that I belong to. So I really, really enjoy that experience.
There was one thing you mentioned that I wanted to ask about. So your father's job, looking out for fire, how did he get that job?
Well, everybody was assigned, even though you were a refugee or you were an English citizen that could not go into the army, everybody was assigned a job. And I guess because my father was not that fluent in English, they said, all right, you know what? You look for fires and report the fires by telephone to us. And that's what he did. And I guess he did it for a few years. Fortunately, he was safe, and then he would have to go to work the rest of the day. So his experiences, together with my mother's also, his experiences during the war were much more severe than what we as young kids lived through. To us, there was a lot of excitement. To them, to my parents, it was a very, very arduous journey. So, and they never talked very much about themselves or what they experienced. So, and we were too dumb to ask questions. So I regret that to the day. See, what you're doing is a wonderful thing, is asking the same way as Steven Spielberg did it with a Holocaust survivor, that they would tell their stories so that when they all die, and most of them have died now, there would still be these stories on tape that people remember and would make these experiences so much more realistic to people, because history is very strange. You live through it, but then when it's past, you forget it. And certainly if you didn't live through it, I was watching a program on TV just before you called, and 𝗵𝘃𝗹𝗱 was on there. And she said, I grew up in Arizona. She says, I knew nothing about the Holocaust, which surprised me. But if you are not involved in running away, being surrounded by family members who experienced that, what are you going to know? What are you going to remember in 2020 as opposed to what happened in 1940? These things that you're doing, I guess you're doing it maybe as a Hillel project, I'm not sure. But what Steven Spielberg did was so important for people over the next 100 years should know what went on. And I have to tell you one other experience that I had. I befriended a family, a Gentile family, that to this day, I still am very, very friendly with them, and I call them my niece and my nephew, and their children are my nieces and my nephews. And they, one of the kids moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And one day I get a call or I get a message from one of their kids. In other words, not the boy that I had gotten to know that I called my nephew, but one of his daughters, and she was going to Catholic school. And she wrote to me and she says, I am studying about the Holocaust in her Catholic school. And she says, I've read the book by Elie Wiesel called Night. And she says, you know what? Nothing would make me more knowledgeable about what went on if better than my Uncle Sigi taking me to Europe. And you know what? I took her and her mother. I wanted to go alone with her, but she was 17 and I didn't trust myself. So I don't know if I didn't trust myself. I wasn't trusted. And so her mother came along. So the three of us went through, and we went on a trip through Europe, and we wound up in Auschwitz and Birkenau, and she learned a lot through there. But what impressed me was not the trip so much, was the fact that in Catholic school they were learning about the Holocaust, and I was very impressed with that, because if young people growing up don't learn about it, they won't know anything about it. It'll be a paragraph in a history book. So that was very, very important, and I admire what you're doing by recording my experiences, which thankfully were nowhere near the experience of Holocaust survivors. So I thank you for doing this.
I thank you for sharing your stories with me. I really enjoyed listening to them.
Oh, that's very good. I'm very pleased about that. I hope I covered everything that you wanted to know. I'm available. I'm still going to be around for a few more years. Feel free to call on me.
And is it okay that we publish the interview? So basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use the transcript to write a little story blurb. And then if people are interested to hear more, I want them to be able to click on the story and then listen to the audio of you telling it yourself.
That would be very interesting, because while we've been doing this, I haven't been looking at myself, so I don't know what I look like. I've been looking at your face the whole time, which is a lot more pleasant than looking my way. But I would be very interested in seeing what you come up with, and maybe my nieces and nephews and their children, over the years, will be able to learn more about me and my own experiences. One thing I just remembered as I was talking about that is that when when the Statue of Liberty, what's the other island?
Staten Island, Ellis Island.
Ellis Island. Ellis Island. Thank you. My memory is not so good. So I can't remember what I had for breakfast. I can remember more about 1940. But one day I got a letter from 𝗵𝘀𝘀𝗀𝗃, who was the head of Chrysler and I think GM. And he was in charge of reestablishing what Ellis Island was all about. So he said, if you want, send in, if your family came through Ellis Island, you are eligible to get a little diploma that said so-and-so came through Ellis Island, what year. Now, my parents didn't come through Ellis Island. Ellis Island was closed at that time in 1950. But he had said, if you want, send in $100 for each parent, and we'll send this little diploma-like plaque, and we will put their names on the walls in Ellis Island. Excuse me. Sure enough, years later, my nephew went through Ellis Island, and he spotted my parents' names, and he made tracings of them. And he said, "Guess what we found?" And he found the tracings of the names that 𝗵𝘀𝘀𝗀𝗃 and his group had put there. So I was very pleased about that. And this is the way I look at what you're doing now. Years from now, somebody will remember and say, "Hey, my Uncle Sigi did that." So anyway, thank you very, very much.